Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Mellow Caramelo Natural Process Brazil from House of Funk. And there's the cup right there. And yes, we are working with a generic cup on this one. This is part 4 of our 6-part Vancouver review series. I'm currently at their only location off Esplanade. This is actually the 3rd time House of Funk has appeared on this channel, as we've done 2 full bottle reviews of their coffee in the past. Let's discuss House of Funk, as they're a very interesting business because technically they're a brewery and they only began roasting a couple of years ago, but have already established themselves as one of the more well-known Vancouver-based coffee roasters outside of the city. As I've seen a number of multi-roasters start carrying their coffee, that's pretty interesting to me, given that the last time I was in Vancouver they weren't even roasting coffee, but I knew the next time I was in the city I wanted to stop by and check out the coffee side of their operation. So let's discuss how the coffee side of things does work, because this right here is their drip offering. However, it looks like you can get all of their current offerings as some sort of pour over. I just opted for this one given that this is another opportunity to review another natural process Brazilian coffee. Let's also discuss the roast profile for House of Funk, because they are one of the lightest roasting coffee roasters in the area. The 2 previous reviews I've had of their coffee have both yielded some pretty light coffees in general, especially that wash process coffee. This one right here is the lightest cup of coffee we've had up to this point. It's one of the lightest Brazilian coffees I've ever had. Definitely on the lighter side of the spectrum in terms of the roast profile. So that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. And the first impression I had of this one was the best first impression I've had of any of these coffees up to this point, as this one yielded the most sweetness right from the onset. Now I believe they had something here listed like a caramel apple, something along those lines in terms of the flavor profile for this one, or what it reminded them of. And I could definitely see that, because on the forefront was a lot of the brown candy aspects. For me, a little bit more reminiscent of butterscotch. However, on the back end, it did have a lot of brightness, a lot of bright acidity. So much of that apple acidity very much present within this coffee. That definitely did kind of yield a lighter profile to this coffee in general. This coffee had a lot of, well, standard Brazilian aspects in the sense that it had a slight bit of nuttiness. In addition to that, it had a fair bit of chocolate, and then yet again that very bright apple component to it. But I do want to highlight that on the forefront of this one especially was that brown candy aspect, and given that it had the most sweetness I had experienced of any of the coffees we've reviewed up to this point, it definitely left the best first impression. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. As always, notes written right here for the tasting wheel, and we have so many level 4s in this tasting wheel. So let's go through them. We'll start with the sweetness, which is the first thing I noticed about this coffee. Yes, that kind of caramelized, also butterscotch brown candy sweetness right at the forefront. First experience I had of this coffee, and as a result, that was the first thing I noticed, complementary to the acidity, because as I mentioned, this is a very light profiled cup of coffee as well, with a pretty noticeable and distinct brightness present. And of course we have an airplane flying over, but we will continue. Citrus, level 4, and as I always say, it's kind of difficult to determine where I want to put the apple in terms of this tasting wheel, but the citrus feels like the most apt place to put it, and given that it was very distinct and quite well pronounced within this coffee, it's definitely the best place for it to go. Chocolate, level 4. Yes, sweeter chocolate, very nice chocolate present within this coffee, and it was in nice complement to the caramel, which I listed as the butterscotch caramel. Either way, it's the sweetest, most distinct and defining profile in this coffee right there with the acidity. I would say that those two were in more dominant measure than even the chocolate, so I really enjoyed that aspect of the coffee. Definitely made it the most enjoyable one I've had up to this point, even if I have been reviewing some unusual and coffees that aren't typically my profile to begin with. Body, level 4. Yes, and that's probably attributed to the fact that this is still a Brazilian coffee and it was a batch brewed Brazilian coffee. But it does have a little bit of body to it, maybe not all the way up there at that level 4. I don't think it's the most textured cup of coffee I've had, but it does have a fair bit of body to it as well. Cleanliness, level 4, that's also been in line with the previous natural process Brazilian coffee we reviewed. They do just tend to come out a little bit more clean. This one has plenty of clarity to it. There's nothing really sacrificed in this one whatsoever. Very clean, distinct kind of brown candy profile to it. Finish, level 4. It's probably on the higher side of level 4, and the brightness is the most distinct finish. So you do get a lot of these sweeter components right at the forefront, and then a lot more of the acidity in the back end. Even then, it still kind of remains at that 4. I wouldn't necessarily push it any higher. We have a couple of level 3s, the berry and the stone fruit. Honestly, I feel like the berry was kind of pushing it. It's probably on the lower side of the level 3, but I felt like at times I was able to get a slight bit of a darker berry aspect within this one. And then the stone fruit, I was able to get a little bit more of a kind of sugary sort of artificial stone fruit, so I'm thinking like a mango present in this as well. Both those were a little bit more subtle. Secondary, definitely not quite as pronounced as the caramel or the bright apple acidity, but I felt like I was able to get a slight bit of them in this cup as well. And we have a bunch of level 2s. I don't think any of the level 2s are necessarily worth discussing. Overall, I feel like this is a pretty nice tasting wheel for what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This is one of the better Brazilian coffees I've had in a while, and that's attributed to entirely the sweetness. Given that this was a pretty sweet and light profiled cup of coffee to begin with, I think that's going to kind of lend itself to being one of the more enjoyable coffees I've had from the coffees we've had up to this point in this review series. With that being said, I feel like this is more of a singular cup of coffee. This isn't my profile to begin with either, and I continue to review coffees that aren't my profile in this review series. But this one right here did the best job of making me enjoy it, as I really did appreciate the acidity. If anything, a lot of the coffees have been lacking that, so having a lot more of the brightness in this one has kind of contrasted the other ones that haven't had that. And it had so much of the sweetness, given that this is the sweetest cup of coffee and probably the cleanest of the 4 that we've had up to this point. That's going to be a nice little winning point for me. So for that reason, this so far has been my most enjoyable coffee to this point. I'm kind of hoping to continue reviewing coffees that aren't necessarily my profile throughout the rest of this series. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though. Interesting. Definitely keep in mind the lighter profile, because I think that kind of contrasts with the more traditional aspect of Brazilian coffees in general, because this one has a lot of the traditional Brazilian aspects. So of course the body, the chocolate, the caramel, slight bit of the nuttiness, and the kind of apple component present within it. Those tend to be much more of those traditional characteristics. However, it does have that lighter profile, so the acidity does feel somewhat high and very much prominent within this coffee. So if you're looking for something with a bright bit of acidity, but at the same time great sweetness and a lot of the more traditional Brazilian characteristics, I think all of those components would make this one a very nice one for you. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything from House of Funk, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Mellow Caramelo Natural Process Brazil from House of Funk. Thank you for watching.